This is the Dane Moore NBA podcast brought to you by Prize Picks coming a Monday morning. It's February 26th, and we have the Wolves' first two games out of All-Star break to get to on today's show. We'll kind of mix them together. On Friday night, the Bucks came to town, and they beat the Wolves 112-107. That game was fueled by a third quarter where the Wolves just kind of stalled out. They lost that quarter 36-13. Otherwise, played pretty well in that game. I'm sure we'll touch on that here. And then on Saturday night, maybe not a pretty win, but it was a win. The Wolves beat the Brooklyn Nets 101-86. I got Wolves beat writer from the Strib, Chris Hine, here with me as we're going to get back into our normal rhythm of discussion. We were talking about that, Chris.
I was going to say there was some dust accumulating on my microphone here.
Well, it was
break out the pledge this morning.
We were we got a little discombobulated with travel and all that stuff.
Right.
Chris here on Monday. Jason and I are going to go on Tuesday, and then I think Britt and I will go Wednesday. Kyle on Friday might do a guest pod there too. But we're going to get back into our normal rhythm as we hit I hate when people call it the second half of the season after All-Star break.
Final
third of the season.
Mm-hmm.
Chris, I was not at Target Center for the Nets game on Saturday. Had a wedding. I did watch it yesterday. You were there. You called the game against the Nets a rock fight in your story. It appeared to be that way to me as well. Watching it back, what was that about? What do you? I mean, I feel like I can sometimes get a better feel from that being at a game rather than watching at home. Was it a back-to-back? Was it about playing without Gobert, who did miss Saturday, played in Friday's game against Milwaukee, rolled his ankle, did not play on Saturday against Brooklyn? Or is this all just kind of a little bit of a post All-Star break hangover? What are you feeling?
A little bit of everything all rolled into one. Thank you for not being there, by the way. We were able to spread out a little bit on press row the other night. So that was helpful.
Do what I can, you know.
But this was so it's interesting. This was the second time that they faced Brooklyn this year, and both times were on the tail end of a back-to-back. Both times the game was low scoring. And both times the Wolves kind of had to gut out a win. I think part of it is, as you know, kind of Jace was tweeting about, and this is always his big thing, is like teams that switch all the time against the Wolves tend to defend them pretty well.
Yeah.
And that's what Brooklyn was doing because it slows down the Wolves' rhythm on offense. And especially when it comes to Ant and Carl, they see a mismatch and then they try to be like, oh, well, let me just take this guy one-on-one off the dribble, which is not how the Finch offense is really supposed to operate or how they're supposed to play this style of offense.
Right.
We've seen Rudy be out earlier in the season in that Boston game, and offense played really, really well.
Sure.
In that game, that's usually kind of the conventional thinking is, oh, Rudy's out, so maybe some of the spacing issues and challenges that he presents being on the floor get rectified when he's not playing. So at least while the defense may go down, the offense may go up. But that didn't happen in this game. And instead the defense kind of kept at its pace even with him off the floor. And you know, I just think I'm sitting there Saturday and I'm just thinking kind of big picture thought about the offense, which is this offense seems to be so delicate, like in terms of the rhythm at which they have to play at to operate well. And I mean, it's just maybe a flaw of the system is that it requires such a rhythm and so everybody being on the same page. Obviously Ant is the main driver of this, but what was the thing that we talked about going into the break, those last four games, starting with kind of like that second half of the Milwaukee game on the road? It was Ant making like quicker decisions, being more decisive, and especially, in that Bucks game, in that Clippers game. And I just don't feel like he's really come out of the break the same way that he went into it, just in terms of his decision making. You could talk about the shot making and how shots, aren't falling. That's to be expected with Ant when he has a long break. We've seen that a lot in his career when he misses time or has a break or misses a couple games back-to-backs. Like there are nights you can just tell Ant's just not going to have a good rhythm shooting. But I just didn't think like he's been playing with the same force and decision making that he had going into the break. And maybe it just is going to take him some time to ramp back up to that level after trying to unplug a little bit following All-Star weekend. So, but that's how I think. Not fragile and delicate, I guess, is maybe the better word. Mm-hmm. The offensive efficiency for this team is because they just really don't have a lot of things that they go to when things aren't really working well, and it just is so predicated on that rhythm that they struggle when it's just not there.
Yeah, it felt a little selective, I think, from Ant on Friday and Saturday of like, when am I going to, assert myself? Because, in the fourth quarter, he kind of took over, right? Or the second half of the fourth quarter.
He did.
Put the game away. Like he was the finisher of that game. I think he was 5 for 6 in the fourth quarter. I was actually rewatching that this morning, and there was one possession where it was moved. It was like an Ant Cat kind of get action. It was like back and forth to them. And then the ball found slow-mo under the basket. Remember, he had like that pump fake like 5 times play and scored it. And it worked. It was like, okay, here it is. This is what it looks like when it's not stagnant, selectively choosing that possession to kind of do what you need to do. Move the ball with this team. And I was thinking about after the Milwaukee game, I wrote down, I was like, I feel like turnovers turn into fear of ball movement for this team. You know what I'm saying? Like it's kind of like you make that turnover. I mean, guys, we've all probably done that,
right.
If you get scared when they steal the ball from you. Right. And it that actually taps into the worst tendencies, right, of this team in particular, or the way in which this team needs to just play extremely confidently offensively. And not just confident with the shot. They need to have the confidence in the ball movement and in the offense. And when they do, it like you were saying, it was the team that got them into the All-Star break and was one of the best offenses over the final few weeks. And, you leave that for a week and maybe, I don't know if they totally fell back into bad habits, but situationally they did. And selectively they sort of got out of them. I don't know. I mean, I think part of that is having a 22-year-old as kind of your main force. I also think Rudy, when he does play, harnesses some of that focus a little bit more. And I had that down. We can talk about this, just like what it looked like playing without Rudy versus, when he does play. There's just that being the vet, being the kind of person that holds people accountable, not just on defense, but offense as well, or offensively can open Ant up just with a good screen. I think when Rudy misses time, there's going to be a little bit more of that volatility of what to expect from this team, because he is helpful to the offense. And then also defensively, he kind of can inspire offense with defense. I thought though, and you kind of mentioned it too, even playing without Gobert in that game against Brooklyn, it wasn't a bad defensive game. I mean, Brooklyn missed a lot of shots. They're maybe just not a good team, but just watching it, you kind of lost Gobert's like wall at the rim, but you didn't really lose that sort of swarming nature, or at least the swarming style of defense showed up frequently, if not every single possession in that game. But yeah, defensively in this game, what did it look to you? What did it look like to you with Rudy off the floor?
They talked a lot about kind of varying coverages a little bit, so it sounded like they were throwing a lot of different stuff out there. I didn't go back and rewatch the game because, frankly, I don't want to do that to myself. So they talked a lot about that. I mean, I just thought the effort was there. I think that was the most impressive thing about Saturday night's game from the Wolves' perspective was, despite tired legs, despite their struggles offensively for 3 quarters, largely in that game. I thought that the defensive effort never lagged. And I think that's one of the things that you can always pin to with this team is in the half court, the defensive effort never lags. The defense tends to have problems when the offense has problems.
True.
Because as you saw in the third quarter against the Bucks, it was transition after transition opportunity because the offense stunk. So, that's one thing that this team, which is prone to inconsistency, has been very consistent about on a night in, night out basis, is the defensive effort is always there in the half court, I should say. Should specify that. So I thought that was very encouraging to be able to do that, even against a bad team without Rudy, like to play that level of defense. They got a bunch of blocks, I thought that was impressive. And everybody seemed to, like, Nas had a few, I think. Carl
McHale had that spike one.
Yeah. Like they did a good job of affecting shots. Like I was impressed with the defense, given that Rudy was off the floor on Saturday night. So that was encouraging.
I think an interesting wrinkle to Rudy not playing, and this maybe extends to anyone in the rotation not playing, is it deprives the bench a little bit, right? Maybe specifically scoring wise, it was not a good scoring game for the bench there, right? You move Kyle Anderson up into the starting lineup, who, hasn't individually been a super efficient player, but he does kind of inspire that ball movement often. He finds his spot to the spaces that he needs to be on the floor. And once you put him into the starting lineup, it kind of changes the way in which the second unit rotation work. And what I put down in my notes is I was like, this is the case for a buyout guy. We've talked about how I don't think there's an every night spot. I don't think they believe, you go get player X and you bring them in and they're in the rotation the next day. But if guys like Gobert, and really anyone in the rotation is going to miss a game, it shifts things around, and you could use somebody coming off the bench to eat up 12, 15 minutes and be able to give you some offensive spark. We could talk about McDaniels in a little bit. I thought he did some of that, but I just was like, okay, this is where I could see you are the number one seed in the West. Somebody is going to probably want to come play for you, even if you can't offer them an every single night role. They just need a little bit more when Rudy doesn't play. And I think this would kind of show up when anybody does play. It wasn't a good game from the bench in terms of scoring, I thought.
No, I didn't think so. I mean, Nikhil's shot kind of came back down to earth a little bit. I mean, which is to be expected after how red hot he was even through the Milwaukee game. I thought McDaniels looked good though. Like I thought like he's starting to fit in. He's, I think the shot will come. But I just thought he looked more comfortable and more acclimated to what the Wolves were trying to do in that game than he has in any other game so far this season. He's talked about, Finch has talked about, everybody's talked about how this is going to be a ramp up process. The goal is to make sure he's good by April. But I do think that Saturday was an encouraging sign for him, because I just thought it was interesting that Finch has talked about we're going to have like basically 48 minutes of Mike Conley playing.
That is not happening.
That is not happening. It's not happening. In part because Finch is also playing them together at times too. And he's using
check this.
Yeah, what's that? Go ahead. Yeah.
So he's played 45 possessions with him and Conley on the floor together, 79 possessions out there without Conley. So about a third of his minutes have been, that checks out, right? And I didn't really think, and again, this is super small sample size, so let's not overreact to it or anything, but the Morris and Conley together minutes is a net rating of minus 17.8, and Morris out there by himself, Conley on the bench, is plus 25.4. So, I mean, of course, that's going that's going to balance out some, but
right.
I mean, you just sitting on Media Row, like we've talked about this, we're like, man, it doesn't feel like Morris is out there with Conley a lot. It's the first time I looked up the numbers, but it's probably first and foremost noteworthy how often they're sharing the floor together, playing a two-point guard look, more so than it is that the numbers have been bad of that look. But it is. I don't know. We probably maybe at practice today or something. Or did anybody ask Finch about playing Morris and Conley together a lot?
We didn't ask specifically about that. See, this is why we need you in the press conferences. Like we don't think to ask that sort of stuff after a game. He did allude to the fact that he likes the combination.
Yeah.
So he must not have had the net rating stats in front of him at the moment.
And I don't know, maybe it was
But
just that game that was bad. This is not a
right.
big sample.
The other thing too is, I think, to keep in mind specifically for Saturday's game, was Mike Conley, is 36 years old, playing on a back-to-back, trying to,
Right.
So maybe there was a little bit of, let's have Mike on the floor, but let's not put so much responsibility on him for a few minutes. You know what I mean? Like maybe a little bit of that was happening Saturday night, to just give him like almost a little less of a workload.
Yeah,
when
go
he was
go
on
be in
the
the corner.
floor.
Don't
Yeah,
necessarily
exactly.
bring the ball up. I get that.
I think maybe there was a little bit of that at play on Saturday night. So it's interesting though, because that was what it was advertised coming in, and that's not quite how it's shaken out so far in terms of the McDaniels minutes. But we'll see. Again, as he gets ramped up, I'm sure his usage will and minutes will increase potentially here. So I do wonder, just we're talking about this 2 weeks from now. What does that look like?
Right. Yeah, and it's a good sign that in a game when you had a main guy out, you needed more from bench guys, and probably the bench guy who gave you the most more than you've been expecting is McDaniels, and to that end, that's that's encouraging. It would have been if it felt like he couldn't take a bigger role and it felt like forced when he was doing it. Now maybe we're raising some red flags about, is he ready to be back? Like McDaniels deserves to be and should be in this rotation, kind of regardless of what the role is. They need it, and in theory, right, it's going to get better and better over time. The defensive numbers, again, small sample size with Mike, without Mike, have been really good from McDaniels, and maybe that is just a product of the Brooklyn game. I mean, and a lot of credit to this bad offense for Brooklyn goes to Brooklyn too. But 42% from 2, 17% from 3. The Nets only took 11 free throws in the whole game. It was an offensive rating of 86, and I was like, I wonder if there's been a game that's been worse than that a team has shot worse against them. The Portland game, remember, at Target Center?
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
And then the Houston one at the beginning.
There's got to be a way. There's got to be a way to just delete that Portland game from the records. That Portland home game was not an NBA game.
Right.
That was a glorified preseason game.
Yes, that's true.
But the free throws, interesting. You bring up the free throws. That was the most physical, let them play game I've seen all season.
Right,
like,
for sure.
It didn't matter. They were guys were getting fouled out there, and it was not getting called.
Yes.
But I will say this: the Wolves surely did their share of complaining to the point where Ant got another technical.
Yep.
That benefits the Wolves, though. I think they need to shut up when the refs are swallowing the whistle, because I really think with how they play defense, if the refs are going to let them play, that benefits the Wolves, because then they can get away with stuff on the defensive end of the floor. Like, so when the refs are letting them play as they were on Saturday night, the Timberwolves need to be quiet. They don't want the referees starting to all of a sudden call all this stuff. Yes, that means you're probably going to get fouled on the offensive end a little bit, right? Well, too bad, because it's actually going to give you an advantage in the end, because you will be able to play defense better, and you won't be fouling out Rudy Gobert, Jaden McDaniels. Those guys are going to be able to stay on the floor for you and get away with some stuff. So when the officiating,
totally right.
When the officiating is as it was driving me nuts a little bit, because it's like, you don't understand. This is an advantage for you. Be quiet and just let them officiate how they're going to officiate, because it's going to benefit you more than the other team.
And theoretically, that's what the playoffs more like, right?
Yes.
So that, I mean, and when we think about the playoffs, and if we're listing reasons of which this team could underwhelm, it's the idea that mentally their minds and their focus wanders, as it did in the third quarter against the Bucks on Friday night. Like, yeah, that it is honestly one of the biggest things I'm thinking of, like, with my mind on the playoffs, is what is this team's mental relationship with the whistle, and that goes
50%. Yes. We've all seen it.
Let's grab our first break here, and we have a new sponsor. I'm excited to share that our new sponsor is Adriana Lonick, who is a realtor for Coldwell Banker Realty. And when Adriana and I first met to discuss this partnership, it kept making more and more sense to me because, of course, many of you listeners are at least somewhat considering buying or selling a home, whether you're looking to be a first-time home buyer or you've bought and sold many homes. Adriana wants to help you make your next step the best experience it can be, and we are adding a perk. You mentioned this podcast. When you contact Adriana, you will get a pair of free Timberwolves tickets when you book a consultation with her. Adriana is a Wolves fan and a season ticket holder. And just kind of reading through the reviews of her work, it's clear she's going to provide that quality, trustworthy information that you need when you specifically are stepping into the home buying or selling experience. Working with Adriana makes home buying definitely more accessible. You don't need to know everything about. I don't know anything about it. And the step to, as somebody who's considering those sort of things in my own life, is to start by asking questions and getting there. And it's hard to know where to begin. And the reality of the situation is it starts with one of these consultations with someone to walk you through it. So if you do, if this is a place where you're at in your life and you want to consider purchasing or selling a home, go to thedancingrealtor.com or call or text Adriana at 715-304-9920 to book a consultation. And again, book one of these consultations, get you some Wolves tickets to do that. Again, her name is Adriana Lonick. I've really enjoyed getting to know her in the process of this. And she works with Coldwell Banker Realty. If you're considering next steps in home ownership and don't know where to begin, again, go to thedancingrealtor.com as you see on the screen here to take next steps, or contact her at 715-304-9920. Get the ball rolling on home ownership and score a pair of free Wolves tickets at thedancingrealtor.com.
This podcast might be changing my life, Dane. We have not only do people recognize me more, but now English muffins become a part of my life, and now I might have a realtor to contact about buying a home. We'll see. We'll see how this goes here.
In all like actual seriousness, it's really cool to have like local sponsors.
Absolutely, 100%. Like to have like Wolves fans, that feel are sponsoring their businesses and things like that. It's very cool to see.
Yeah, it's flattering, and it's and we have some national sponsors too. We appreciate them, but it's been cool whether it be the brewery or a few other like local restaurants and businesses and a whole array of them. I always say is like, if you are considering purchasing any of this stuff, like, help out the pod, but also just kind of help out this Wolves fan community by supporting their different businesers. Again, that's Adriana.
To the Star Tribune too.
Yeah. Right. Another local, not sponsor, but they're part of the squad.
They're part of the show, right? Yes, exactly.
Shout out Glenn. Chris, it's always interesting watching a game afterwards. Maybe one or two games a year I'll miss because of a family something. And going back to watch it the first time after, you've kind of checked Twitter or whatever or I've read you guys, and the McDaniels effort thing was pretty prevalent after the game. Jim Pete was calling it out on the broadcast, not really knowing where Jaden's head was at. Just at home would not have really totally jumped off the screen to me. But he was talking about it. Some people were highlighting some clips. I saw a couple of quotes that came out afterwards. What did you think about the McDaniels effort or lack thereof? I mean, clearly at one point Finch pulled him as like 3 minutes into the third quarter, went for Nikhil and had Jaden sit down for a little bit. I mean, Jaden came back in, hit a big three at the end of the game, but what was that all about? What stood out to you?
I don't know. We didn't really specifically ask Jaden about that last night. It was more so just kind of, the fourth quarter shots and also kind of what happened in the little brouhaha after, late in the game. but I think, it was a little noticeable when Finch, to the point where Finch pulls him in the third quarter, and Finch, kind of referenced afterwards, like he's got to get out of this funk that he's been in, and maybe the fourth quarter, hitting 2 big threes was the first step in kind of doing that. Listen, we know Jaden is prone to frustration. We know that he is prone to letting the emotions of a game get into his head from time to time. And I don't know if it's a cumulative effect of Friday and Saturday, kind of building up. I thought he played. I mean, outside of that, I thought he was playing okay. Like, especially
right. Well, that's what I'm saying.
Like, I don't. Yeah. It didn't quite. It was just, maybe it was just a bad moment for him. I don't want to.
What I put down is it just seemed like he was in a bad mood that night.
Yeah. Then that could be it.
Which is just a human sort of thing that happens. Yeah. And we do that with Ant all the time, and he's 22, and there's. Finch always says there's a lot of different ways for immaturity, to show up. That's kind of like his go-to line. And it's, but I think that really is it's like, it's a way to name varying levels of effort. And it's not like, it's not an excuse. This team will be and is clearly better when there is more of that consistency. But part of it, and again, this is going to sound totally like I'm excusing the behavior or whatever this is, not just Jaden last night, but like broadly, when this team and the young players in particular have varying effort, it's like arrogance doesn't have to come with winning, but it often does. That's not just like a Timberwolves thing. You see that around when you become a good team, and this team has deserved to be labeled as such, obviously, like particularly maybe when you're a little bit younger, there's some more of that arrogance that kicks in, that I don't think is the end of the world. I think it's somewhat to be expected from players in their early 20s. And what just needs to happen is it just needs to be nipped in the bud when it does happen. And I think the difference we see, what I thought when it's McDaniels versus Edwards, is Edwards isn't often benched for that, for these moments. And he's your best player, and I know that's a frustration some people have with Finch at sometimes, is like, okay, hold these guys accountable, pull them out of the game. Well, this was an example in which he did do that. He recognized something from Jaden and decided, to pull him out of the game and enforce that in that sort of way. And I think that's just probably part of this. Whatever it is, the varying levels of effort from anybody on the team. It doesn't need to be reserved to the young guys. But if there is an arrogance, there needs to be an accountability there too. And it also doesn't need to be some sort of toxic problem. I think it's just something that comes over the course of an 82 game. Yep.
Yeah. One other thing I'll say about Jaden, and I think that goes maybe underappreciated about him and his role on this team, is this team asks him to be its best perimeter defender, to take a lot of very difficult defensive responsibilities on a night in, night out basis. And we've often heard that, he only gets offense when the offense is flowing, right? And that's kind of how he gets shots. Plays don't get called for him, things like that, right? I can imagine it'd be very difficult, as somebody who played basketball once upon a time, where if all you're doing is playing defense and you're not getting any shots, like that's a little hard. That's a little hard to do. And he wasn't really getting a lot of shots the first 2 games coming out because the offense has been so out of rhythm. I think that maybe just is a human nature thing, where it's like you're busting your butt on defense, and then like, I'm not going to get any shots on the offensive end of the floor. Like, I think maybe there's a little bit of that. That's me just spitballing. That's not like reporting or anything like that. But I could see how maybe some frustration would build up, where you are giving 110% on one end of the floor and you're not getting like rewarded for it in a way on the other end, if that makes sense.
So. I don't know why this just randomly came into my mind. I remember like the Durant, Harden, Westbrook Thunder of like 10 years ago. They would always, like, the first play of the game would be like a post up for Kendrick Perkins or Steven Adams. Like, they were just, because that's not what their job was. Their job was to, to defend the rim, set screens, whatever. and they were not a big part of the offense. You're always like, wait, why did they just run a post up for Kendrick Perkins the very first? But they did, and I think Billy Donovan. The thought is like, engage this person by getting them a touch on offense, whatever, and going the other way. And it's different when Jaden is a wing, and it's not like he doesn't get touches. And it's not like he's not part of the offense. It's just that it's a slimmer part of the offense there. And I think, I don't know. I understand frustration or wavering, focus if you're basically kind of being asked to be like the NBA equivalent of an offensive lineman, where it's just like, go do this somewhat unrewarding task time and time again. And I to be fair to Jaden, I think he broadly embraces that.
I think he does too, because we know how much he loves playing defense. But it's just natural, especially when you're a starter,
right?
Like to want to have the ball and show what you can do on that end of the floor,
and maybe know that you can do more than you're doing, right? Like, And they're not a good offensive team, or they haven't been a good offensive team.
And these last two nights, and it goes hand in hand. It's like, when does Jaden get his offense? It's when the offense is in rhythm and the ball's moving and he's open for threes, or he's cutting and getting open lanes, blah, blah, blah. And these last two games, that was not the case at all. So just an interesting game.
It's just worth putting a little pin in, note.
I think it's been an interesting year for Jaden overall. I think he has been more good than bad, or lackadaisical or whatever, just in terms of what they ask him to do on a night in, night out basis, because we don't see it. I think we as media or fans, I mean, you chart a player's growth by their offensive numbers, generally speaking, right? Like, that's easy to point to. It's like, oh, this guy's shooting better this year,
right? Yeah,
averaging more points. But it's hard to chart the growth of somebody whose main strength is the defensive end of the floor.
Totally. Yeah.
So, that's I think it's a little tricky when it comes to kind of the Jaden discourse over the full season, because you could look at his offensive numbers and say they've, plateaued or whatever, or stagnated.
But that was the expectation.
But and it's just very hard for him to take a leap offensively when he's not a prominently featured part of the offense. So,
a prominently featured part of the offense on Saturday was Cat. He kind of we
That's
talked
why you're
about
the best in the business. Those segues.
Thank you. Ant finished the game, but Cat was kind of the propeller of an overall underwhelming. The Wolves did not have a good offensive game themselves. I liked one sequence from Cat in particular. He got one of those post ups, which isn't really a post up because he catches it at like 18, 19 feet. The double team comes. It's the one where he traveled, or they called him for a travel. Like, he dragged his foot while he was trying to make a skip pass out of it. He was really frustrated in the moment on that play. And the following offensive possession is when he had that big dunk. And he took that frustration out on the rim, and didn't flail on the drive. Kind of got bumped on it, but decided to, rather than like throwing the head back, went and finished at the rim. That should be the expectation in those situations and not the exception. But I found that encouraging from him. And I think it's a broader representation of, I think, a growing confidence Cat has kind of before the break, maybe the month before. And now he's not playing perfectly, but he's playing with a greater feel and confidence in his role. And the thing is, again, the topic we're talking about all the time is, how does this team get a little bit better offensively for the rest of the season? And I think one of the answers maybe is just like, it's more Cat, and it's more effective Cat, and it's Cat not playing volatile. And I have some more confidence that is coming. And he did step up into that role in a game without Gobert on Saturday night. They probably lose that. They probably lose that game without Carl last night or Saturday night.
I feel like we say that a lot during the course of a season. It's like, they probably lose this game if Carl's not playing.
It's a good point.
I think it's something to remember in the trade Carl discussion that takes over from time to time.
Sure.
Because I feel like we sit here maybe once a week or maybe once every
maybe once a week. Honestly, maybe once a week. I don't think
it's like, well, they don't win this game probably without Carl's efficient night offensively.
Totally.
I think, and I don't know if this is just his really bad start coloring my judgment here. Because the first 7 games or whatever it was up to that Celtics game was some of the worst and kind of immature ball we've seen Carl play. He's really turned a corner since then. But I feel like he has gotten at least a little bit better this season at doing the stuff you're talking about, where it's like he hasn't let frustration carry over as much. I don't have the offensive foul numbers in front of me, but I feel like it hasn't been.
It's got to be down.
It's got to be down. I feel like it hasn't been as big of a problem outside of that first couple of weeks. I think he's done a better job of managing his emotions, managing his body on the offensive end of the floor, not elbowing people, not hooking people as much. I do feel like he has played a relatively more controlled game for most of the season than I think he has in other years. Now, the ultimate test is going to be, will he be able to do that in April? And we've seen that has been an issue at times in the last 2 playoff series. Can he do that for most of a playoff series is the big question. But I think at least in the regular season, he is showing that he is making some strides in being more under control and not letting it bleed over possession to possession when he gets upset.
I think that's totally true. And I think it's all about framing, right? It's not that those things aren't happening. He did get called for a hook in the Brooklyn.
He did. He got called for one, but that was it.
Exactly. And that's the point is, and I'm myself included, is it's like, all right, rather than remembering that he did get an offensive foul or a time that he fell over to the basket driving or got a hook, is ask myself, well, how frequent was it? Was it one? Was it 2 of them over the course of the game? Or was it 3 possessions in a row that he did it, And at that point, okay, like pile on and point to it. This is an issue. But like, I think what we're both getting at is it's not that stuff has gone away completely.
Right.
It's that the frequency is going down. And when that's happening and you just look at the end product and it's a pretty efficient and effective night, generating offense in multiple different ways on a night when your team, and particularly on Saturday, could not consistently generate offense. And then it's not that hard to sort of get a feel for when Ant doesn't have it going, or he's struggling against the switching coverages like you talked about, or against Brooklyn on Friday when he couldn't really figure out how to navigate Lopez being dropped all the way back to the rim. There's just these things that time to time, it takes Ant a while to figure out sometimes what he needs to do in a specific game, specific matchup, specific coverage. And if Carl can kind of be somewhat consistent through that, it allows you an opportunity to be able to do what happened on Saturday and win that game where, Ant didn't play well. And then in the fourth quarter, he did. Started moving the ball again, had like 12 points or whatever in the fourth quarter and won the game. Carl keeps that. Kyle's corrected me on this a few times. I think this is just right. At the beginning of the season, I talked about how Cat was like the ceiling. He whatever you get out of Carl unleashes a higher ceiling for this team. And I think what's kind of switched a little bit is Carl has become more of the floor and more of the consistency, and Ant's boomlets are what really drives that ceiling there too. And that's important. And just when we reflect on the value of Carl this season, there's been more of that. And again, wasn't a great game, but he did that against Brooklyn.
He has been the more, I think, steady offensive player overall and the more efficient player, and the numbers bear that out.
Right.
That's why he was named an all-star this season.
For sure.
So I think that's a good way of putting it. Is Ant needs the time to figure out how a team is attacking him or planning for him on a given night. And you can even go back before the break. It was like, think about that Clippers game before the All-Star break, where it took a halftime to like kind of have him recalibrate his approach. Like, okay, Ant, here's what they're doing to you. You got to play quicker off the catch and go fast, because this is how you're going to beat them. Sure enough, he comes out in the second half, and that's exactly what happens. And they blow them out as a result. To your point about the boom ceiling, when Ant gets it figured out, or gets a team figured out, then this team can explode.
Yeah.
But as you saw, at least, Karl, on a night where nothing else was going right offensively, you look up and Karl's got 16 points on 8 for 13, or 7 for 12, whatever it was.
Right.
He gets to the line a little bit, and it's just it's at least something you can go to. Because listen, even when the offense is breaking down and there's no ball movement, any possession that ends with Karl taking a 3 is generally
you'll take it
better. It's better than a lot of other things that can happen on a given offensive possession, right? Yeah. That's all you get out of a possession. So, I think he deserves the credit for that, for really, and we've talked a lot about it before. It's just embracing this role of who he is on this team and being more of a steady presence and reliable presence on a night in, night out basis than I think he has in recent years of his career. So
because he was that too when he was younger, right? Up and volatile. There was that element of a and now as not the young star on the team, as one of the vet stars on the team, there's an expectation and a need to have that consistency. And I think we probably just don't give that credit enough, because we get the 1 or 2 or 3 bad images or bad sequences over the course of the game. I did think that was really encouraging. That one play travel probably wasn't, maybe it was a slight travel. It didn't have to be called. And rather than losing his head, he actually took it out on the rim and was like, okay, dunk, let's.
And you know what? That is the kind of game where, especially with the officiating, where we have seen in the playoffs where he starts to lose it a little bit.
Yep.
Where when officials do swallow the whistle and it becomes a more physical game, and he's not getting the calls that he's used to on the offensive end of the floor, that tends to take him out of the game.
No, that's exactly like the possession where he would he gets that first bump and he would flail back and get out of it. He didn't do that.
Remember when he slammed the table in front of us in the Memphis series after coming out of the game that one time? That's exactly the kind of game in the playoffs that he takes himself out of, because he's so upset that he's not getting to the foul line as much. But again, I think he realizes it a little bit too, and I think the team does. Back to my point earlier, referees swallowing the whistle is not a bad thing for this team. Overall, it's not a bad thing at all. So just try to put up with it as best you can on the other end of the floor, because it'll pay off in the long run.
That is what should stick. That is a thought that should stick from it, because it's true. It's just true, and it's part of the style of play of being a strong defensive team. That's probably what you want. If you could choose an officiating pattern, you would choose that. That's the last thing I wanted to talk about, was just the defense again looking like the number 1 defense. And it has been true all year to say that the Wolves have been the number 1 defense all season. They have been, right? Started really strong and have never lost that number 1 spot. But if you do kind of it didn't have the same teeth. It wasn't at that. They have not been the best defense every single month, right? And what I think we're getting back to, because I thought the Milwaukee game and that third quarter overshadowed what was one of the best first halves of defense.
Oh yeah, no, the first half was great. Yeah.
There's just that teeth is back to the defense, and they look again like they are playing in the moment like the number 1 defense, not just the team that in the aggregate has the number 1 defensive stats for the season. And to me, that is extremely, encouraging. While this offense is still clearly figuring itself out a little bit, that teeth of the defense and that swarm we were talking about, even without Rudy, plus when you have Rudy at the rim, I mean, it's what that defense inspires offense. It gets them out in transition. It just stagnates, the other team. And I just think the defense is back. I think like the number one defense is back.
I'm not surprised that with the week off, the defense is back. That's that's
a good point.
How these two games have played out does not really surprise me at all. The offense fell out of rhythm because they weren't playing on a every other night basis, but the defense with a chance to rest and refocus does come back strong.
Yep.
Because I feel like with how suffocating they can play, with the amount of effort that they play, once you hit kind of January on the schedule, defense might be a little more up and down than you think. As the offense starts to click in, right? Now I think this is the time of the season where I think their defense can really shine. They're out of the All-Star break. The finish line is in sight. I do expect them now. They've gotten past the quote-unquote dog days of the season. And I really do think they're set up for a very strong defensive finish to this season.
I do too.
I feel like it plays out well for that. And just, I mean, listen, even when the defense was bad, it wasn't terrible. Like they always had at least a little bit of a floor there. So I'd be very optimistic about how this team is going to play defense down the stretch. I think it could be a really good stretch of defensive basketball. You mentioned that they were number one basically from the whole time. They're basically like when Mariah Carey gets a number one song on the Billboard Hot 100, she settles in there and she doesn't leave it for several weeks. So that is the Timberwolves defense this season. Consistency. You might have some dips there here and there, but she's always going to be number one at the end of the day. That is the comp there. That's why they bring me on the show every Monday.
Exactly. It's the only thing I'm worried about with the defense is the outside factors, which are pretty much the offense, right? If you're turning the ball over, the other team's playing in transition.
The third quarter of that Milwaukee game is like, if they ever need a reminder about what bad offense can do to them, third quarter Milwaukee game, just put it on a loop to remind them about what can happen when they stink offensively.
I bet you that's what they're doing right now at 11 a.m. on Monday at practice.
I don't think they waited till 11 a.m. to go over that. I'm sure they did it before the game on Saturday in their walkthrough.
That's probably
that probably came up first and foremost. But they need reminders from time to time. And I do think overall this team has done a good job of learning from its mistakes generally on the year. I harken back to that Atlanta game where everybody wanted to fire Finch after the third game of the season. They blow the big lead, and then it took them a long time before they blew a big lead again in a game. I think they've generally done a good job of learning and adjusting as the season has gone along, and it's why they're tied for first in the Western Conference at this point in the season.
Absolutely. They figured out that to get out of those ruts is not about Cat or Ant taking over. It's about doing it as a team. They forget that from time to time. But when they do that, again, like they did against Brooklyn in the fourth quarter, this team has more than enough talent on the offensive side of the ball with that defense to win every single game. I mean, there's so few teams night to night where you're like, if the Wolves bring that defense and some competent offense, there's so few games where I'm going into that being like, I expect the Wolves to lose. I would pick against them. Like if you can get that, you're picking the Wolves almost every night. Coming up the rest of this week, I wanted to we're going to have Jace tomorrow. Chris and I are going to go to practice today. And then Jason and I will probably talk about a little bit tomorrow, what comes out of practice. Look forward here to the rest of the week. They play the Spurs on Tuesday and the Grizzlies on Wednesday. We have a pair of tickets to give away for the Wednesday game. Again, that's for Patreon subscribers. You just send us a message on Patreon that you are available. Again, this Wednesday Grizzlies game, send us a message there. We'll pick someone at random. We have 2 lower level tickets for that game. We're excited to get people into the stadium. I know it's a little pricey, getting pricier to go to these. So on Wednesday, hit us up about that. Britt and I will talk. And then Kyle and I later in the week Chris, do we miss anything?
I think we're good. I mean, listen, that was one of the worst games of the season. We just talked about it for like 49 minutes. So
I know. Well, it's so hard. I'm bad at this of being able to be like, I was sitting down this morning. I'm like, okay, well, I can't get myself to talk about the Milwaukee game as much because it's not the most recent one.
Right.
I kept like putting things down, and then I'm like, no, I just watched the Brooklyn game. Like I'm gonna keep talking about that. We're trying to not do, at least during the regular season, too many weekend shows so we can kind of balance it out. But that is the disadvantage of a Friday night game. Chris and I might struggle to get to that on Monday, but we know what the story was of the Milwaukee game. I mean, it was actually one of the most boring plots to me of the season because it was like awesome, shot themselves in the foot really hard in the third in the exact way they always have. There's no like level of nuance we can get to it. They started they got stagnant, turned the ball over. And I think they were up by 7 at halftime or down by like 16 or 17 at the end of the third. It's just like, we know that you kind of know that story of what happens. They're weirdly predictable. Like, it's
when this team goes off the rails, it goes off the rails in very
the same
predictable ways
all
the time. It's always the same culprit. And it's never a night where it's like, oh yeah, they played great offense. They shot 66%, but the defense was just not there. That never happens with this team. We never have a night like that.
You know what? It is. There's something to that, and never having lost 3 games in a row. There's like a weird consistency to this team.
Well, it's defense. I mean, it's defense. Defense provides that floor. That is because defense is more bankable than making shots is. So, it's the defense that's what this team is. It's who it is. And it's why they've been so successful, even when they've had these mercurial offensive moments. Breaking out my Brit thesaurus here.
There you go. Hopefully for that defense, Rudy Gobert is back sooner than later. Again, Friday in the locker room, he didn't seem too freaked out about the injury, but you roll your ankle and you play in a game 23 hours later. It's kind of no surprise that they gave him that rest there. But hopefully, Gobert is back on Tuesday, and that consistency of the defense is even more consistent. You know what you're going to get out of them defensively with Gobert back, and he's a big part of the offense too. That game, that's the team offensively has a totally different feel with Rudy out as well.
Well, how many second chances? They had like 30 second chance points in that game against Milwaukee.
Carl actually had a lot of those.
Carl had a lot of offensive rebounds too. Like that's
becoming a thing.
They both really attack the offensive glass. So if they're gonna clank shots, you need somebody to try to get them back for you.
Yep. No.
So
yeah. And they have been, and that was a pre All-Star. We talked so much about before the All-Star break of like, oh, the turnovers are down. All of a sudden the offense is up. Like part of another ingredient of that is they've been getting more offensive rebounds for the last month, and we're adding all these little, I don't know, potions into the pot, and hopefully leads to an above average offense here the rest of the way. Well, Chris, I appreciate you coming on. You guys are checking out Chris's story, supporting hopefully the Star Tribune at startribune.com. Chris is on the road at all of these games, and giving us the coverage that we wouldn't otherwise have. Grateful for that on the pod, and I think Wolves fans everywhere should be, that we have someone on boots on the ground every night there. So, Chris, appreciate you doing it today.
No problem. Thanks for having me.
I'll see you at practice.
See you in about an hour.
All right. Cool. He's Chris Hine. You're reading him at thestartribune.com. You're following him on Twitter at Christopher Hine. I'm Dane at DaneMooreNBA. I will talk to you with Jace about something tomorrow. We will figure that out. Until then, he's Chris. I'm Dane. Peace out.
How I'm feeling, man, I hope it never stop, yeah. Green and hot so you can find me in the crowd, yeah. Don't let standards ever bring you down, yeah.